Speaking of using the camera, we're filming with the camera right now. So we'll get to all of those specs with how we're shooting it later on in this video, but we love using it to make these previews so you can see a real world use in action of the R6 Mark III.
Yes, so Canon has officially revealed the R6 Mark III. This had been rumored and speculated for quite a while, but is actually reality now. And I think for the most part, most of the specs check out with what people expected. But we're going to go through some of the most interesting parts of Jared's video. Jared Poland, froknowsphoto.com. He obviously gets early access to these things. I don't, so I haven't shot with the camera myself. But I wanted to pull out these tidbits from his video to kind of highlight some things I think are good and some things I think are bad when it comes to the Canon R6 Mark III.
Seems like Canon is incorporating tons of cinema features into cameras that generally weren't seen as cinema cameras in the past. More of the hybrid cameras that were stills first, but also did competent video. Well, now we're starting to see a lot of cinema features trickle down into a camera like this, the R6 Mark III. Now, Canon is telling us that this is still a stills first camera, but after we get through all of the specs and features of this camera, I think you're gonna see that, yeah, it is a great stills camera, but it is also a highly competent cinema camera as well.
Now, it's interesting the language that Jared uses. He keeps saying cinema, 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 and I think that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but cinema is such a loaded word. When you start talking about cinema cameras, that comes with a certain build style that I personally don't even like. I prefer the hybrid style. Something like this speaks to me in the way I like to shoot. And we're going to get to that a little bit later as I have these clips pulled up. But just to say cinema, 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 cinema features trickling down to a stills camera to make a hybrid, I don't know. For me, it's just video. Video is the most clear, straightforward term. It doesn't have any of that baggage associated with cinema, because now all of a sudden you're thinking, are you making movies with this? It's just kind of loaded, and I want to break away from that. I think hybrids are incredible. Probably the most valuable tools that we have as content creators is these hybrid style cameras. We're going to break down the R6 Mark III and maybe why you might want to invest in something like this if you don't already shoot hybrid, but maybe why you might want to stay away from the Canon R6 Mark III, because I think there are some better options that we'll get into. But right off the bat, I just want to get in and say, I don't think this is a camera you should even associate with cinema, and that's okay. That's actually good. There's very few people out there who are shooting cinema, something on a movie screen, you know, a giant projector in a theater. That's not what this is for, and we shouldn't use that word. We should use video, which is, this is great for content, great, YouTube, awesome, content creator, influencer, hybrid, all of that is great and I think valid. But I just don't like the word cinema in this context because I think it just immediately triggers some folks. And so I would just stay away from it altogether.
In terms of the screen, it's still a flip out and rotatable one. Hopefully sometime in the future, they get caught up with the Fujis and the Sonys. So we get to tilt it, but you get the best of both worlds.
So this I wanted to point out because it is funny. It's kind of ironic that after all these years, Canon has finally got the flip out screen on some of their pro models. This back in the day, if you remember the DSLR days, the screen was flat. It was static. It was, you know, robust and weatherproof, and it was more sturdy that way without the flippy screen. People thought the flippy screen was a joke, and now it's become kind of the standard to the point where these screens are flipping in all sorts of directions. But what's interesting is that Jared never mentions Lumix, and I think in his world, he would probably say Panasonic, but he never mentions Lumix. He'll talk about Sony and Nikon and Canon and Fuji, but like, what did Lumix do something to this guy? Did he have a bad experience? I don't know why he's never mentioning the Lumix cameras, because there's another omission he makes later as it relates to the Lumix cameras that I'm just... Like, the Lumix cameras do some of the best flip out screens, arguably the best, I would say. I haven't used their most recent generation of flip articulating. They move all sorts of crazy directions these days, but I've always appreciated how Lumix, yes, Sony, yes, have made, you know, the flip out screens accessible and, you know, just constantly improving compared to this, where it's, yeah, it's like, this is, I had flip out screens like this 15 years ago. Come on.
R5 Mark II grip with a fan, that one does not work. There are no vents in the R6 Mark III, so you cannot use it on the R6 Mark III.
So this is where Jared's talking about the R5 Mark II has fans built in, and then it has this external grip that's kind of expensive, that's more fan power. And I don't really know where things landed on that. I don't shoot with these cameras, so I can't speak to it. But there was some question of like overheating. Do you need it? Do you not? There's probably other videos out there that talk about it, but he's pointing out that this grip with the fan doesn't work with the new R6 Mark III because the R6 Mark III itself doesn't have those internal fan components to be compatible with this external fan grip thing. And this is where I want to call out, strike number one against the R6 Mark III. If there's no fan, I'm not a fan. And I'll just have to say it like that, because Lumix, Sony, Olympus, Fuji, Nikon, Canon, whoever, pick. I don't think the fan is the most expensive part of these cameras. In fact, it's probably got to be the cheapest internal component, or just thermal management in general. It doesn't take a lot. It's not the chip. It's not the silicon. It's not, this giant sensor wafer thing. It's not electric. We just want these things to stay cool, and we want to use their features and their functions as they're advertised. So in the marketing, when you say 6K, 7K, 4K, RAW, 60 frames, open gate, all the tentpole features, I expect those to work all the time. Not a 30-minute window, or you've got 45 minutes, interval before it's going to overheat, and you got to take it easy because it's not a cinema camera. If you want the cinema camera, go buy it. We're past that. We're 10 years in, 20 years in some cases, to these cameras. Hybrids need to work reliably for the features that they advertise. So the fact that the R6 Mark III doesn't have a fan is a kind of a big red flag to me of kind of stay away. I don't trust it. Now, we're going to get into some thermal tests because Jared does do them, and we're going to review those as well. But just strike number one is just no fan. I'm not a fan.
Frames per second with a mechanical shutter. It still has the mechanical shutter for those of you who thought it wouldn't. And you also get 40 frames per second with the electronic shutter with a usable pre-capture this time. The R6 Mark II was one of the first Canons to implement a pre-capture option that really was not very usable. Well, in this case, the new pre-capture option is just like what you find in the R1 and the R5 Mark II. You will get a half a second of pre-capture, which is incredible, especially when you're shooting RAW. Now keep in mind, not every camera company can do this in a competitor like this. Sony, as of now, doesn't have a competitor that can do pre-capture in this price point. Nikon can do pre-capture with the Z6 Mark III, except for the fact that it's JPEG only. You can do 40 frames per second with pre-capture RAW in this camera right here, and it can do something that the R5 Mark II and the R1 currently can't do at the time of recording this, which is activate and deactivate with one press of a button. That
okay, so I'll let him finish here.
Right there is going to save me a ton of frames. We have
Okay, so pre-capture. We're talking about pre-capture, and I don't know how popular this feature even is. He mentions Sony and Nikon having this, where the Sony cameras that do this and do it well are very expensive. And the Nikon cameras that do this in affordable price point, it's JPEG only. The Canon gives you pre-capture, I think in a half-second buffer there before, and it will be RAW, and you can do that with the R6 Mark III. That's great. That's awesome. Cool feature to have. However, I'm pretty sure the Lumix cameras have been doing this, and I think in RAW and at similar price points, but I don't know for sure. And this is where it's interesting because I don't know how popular this feature even is, if anyone even cares. I'm sure it's nice to have if you absolutely need it, and maybe it's an underrated feature that more people should be using. But when I looked up Lumix pre-capture, I couldn't find anything. There's not like a YouTube video. There's one article, I think, from F-Stoppers mentions it, but it's not spelled out in detail. I had to go download the manual for the new Lumix S1 Mark II just to see if it was in the manual, and it is there. They call it pre-burst. And it seems like, according to the manual, I haven't shot with this camera myself, so I can't prove it. Maybe someone out there can do this test or just verify, maybe in the comments, someone who has a Lumix camera, one of the newer, the S1 Mark II or the S1R Mark II. I think both should be able to have this pre-burst capture feature. I know some of the Micro Four Thirds cameras have been doing this for a little bit longer, but when we're talking about full frame, it's kind of a different thing. Apples to apples, apples to oranges, whatever. The full frame cameras, the Lumix ones, in the manual, it does say that you can do pre-burst, and it seems like it should be RAW. And there's actually two different settings, it seems like, but it's not clear if it's pre-burst or if it's full burst or all of it. There's like a higher speed that gives you 12-bit and then like a slightly slower speed that's 14-bit. But it does look like it's raw, according to the manual. But again, this is where Jared's not mentioning other cameras out there, and that's okay. He doesn't have to know every single camera on the planet. I certainly don't. There's a lot of cameras and brands that I'm unaware of, all their features and their intricacies. So I'm just pointing it out as kind of a, hey, actually check this out, or maybe someone should investigate. That's really it. It's not a slam against Jared for not mentioning it. It's just interesting that, you know, he doesn't really pay attention to the Lumix cameras. And I think he's even said that in the past in one of his videos, where he just doesn't care about the Panasonic stuff. And that's fine. Like, you don't have to. But when we're saying these things are new, or, hey, look how great this feature is, I do always like to give credit when other companies have done it first. And I've certainly made that mistake too, where I'll say, oh, check this out. This is so cool. It's got it. And someone says, yeah, that came out 5 years ago on this other, you know, Olympus or Fuji or whatever it is. So it's totally fine. Totally fair, but I'm pretty sure these new Lumix cameras can do this for full frame, and I think the pre-burst is even like a second and a half. Like, you can pick how much of a pre-burst you want. I think it works when you press the shutter halfway. Again, I haven't shot with these cameras myself, so I can't speak to it for sure, but according to the manual, and I wish there was more YouTube videos out there of people showing off just this feature. We get a lot of, here's the whole camera, here's all the features, and it's kind of glossed over. I really appreciate the content where someone dives into one feature and shows you this one thing very specifically. Maybe I'll start doing more of that now that I'm talking about it out loud, but I don't have access to every camera on the planet, so some of you are going to have to do the work too.
But first, for non-cinema Canon cameras, and that is open gate recording. You may have noticed that our frame shifted just a little bit. That's because we went to open gate, and you're seeing things that normally aren't going to be there. Can you spot the hidden sex toy on the shelf behind me? Let me know in the comments down below. You can shoot 7K up to 30p in open gate RAW or HEVC. Just like the C50, the addition of the CF Express card slot allows you to record the entire full sensor from top to bottom for more flexibility in post.
Okay, I really like this. This is not a knock against the Canon R6 Mark III. I'm glad they're finally catching up and giving open gate in a hybrid, something that has slowly but surely over the years made its way into some of these other camera systems. Lumix has been doing it forever, and yes, I love the Lumix cameras. I've been shooting with them for years, since the GH1, in fact. So my history with Lumix goes way back, but that's because they've earned my loyalty by having features that I really get the most out of, that I love, like open gate. So I'm glad to see that feature over in these other camera ecosystems. So Canon has open gate on the R6 Mark III. That's great. That's awesome. Perfect. Wonderful. But I don't know that it's the credit of the CF Express Type B card, because I've been doing open gate on SD cards, slow SD cards, for years. Now, granted, maybe it wasn't raw, so I guess that's maybe a little a gray area in between, a little bit of nuance, where to do raw, maybe you need the CF Express Type B to get that open gate raw. But for general, H.264, H.265, I've got no problem doing open gate to an SD card, which is very convenient because SD cards are kind of cheap, kind of universal, pretty easy to find anywhere you go. So I don't know, just like a little bit of a, open gate, nice. Would have been nice to have it 5 or 10 years ago to be doing all the cool stuff that people are doing now, which I've been doing for so long, and telling folks, you can crop, you can do the vertical stuff. It's even better if you're shooting micro four thirds, because those sensors are even taller. 4x3 is a taller format than these full frame sensors that are 3x2. So it's even better to shoot open gate on micro four thirds. And I've been doing this for a decade now, making vertical crops, square crops, horizontal, all the formats. And people have been scratching their head going, what are you talking about? That sounds crazy. That doesn't sound right. But now that it's catching on, now that the other platforms, now that the big YouTubers like Jared are talking about it, now it'll get out there. And that's great. I love it. Just nice to know that there's other cameras that have been doing this for quite a while. And it's not a bad thing to get more features, but it's also kind of I feel like that's the way with Canon. Hey, we've got this new feature that's new to Canon, but isn't necessarily really new in the market.
No, the C50 has a built-in fan and the R6 Mark III does not, but it does have a new heat dissipating structure. Now, we filmed for over 2 hours in 4K 24p fine and it did not overheat. Now, when it comes to 60p recording, it did eventually overheat, but it took 90 minutes to do so. Now, that is pretty good for a camera that does not have a fan, but keep in mind your results might vary depending on your situation. Is it hotter? Is it colder? Whatever you're doing, it's going to be slightly different, but that is what we were able to get with this camera. One of my biggest...
So here we're talking about overheating, which for whatever reason, over the last 5 years has become such a big deal. Unfortunately, I wish we never had to talk about it. I wish these cameras had thermal management factored in. You know, is it the camera getting hot? Is it the card getting hot? That's the case with CF Express Type B. It seems like it runs hotter because of those data rates being so high. But regardless, there's some kind of build quality associated with the R6 Mark III that's sort of a factor, but it doesn't have the fan. So if you really want that performance, you got to go to the C50, but that's a cinema camera. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, why that's not a hybrid at all. And so if you go the R6 Mark III, because it does have some benefits like IBIS, and you want those video features and you want the thermal performance, Jared is showing you 2 scenarios indoors where you can get that 4K 24 and 4K 60, both recording for quite a while, remarkably well. But here's where I take issue, and this is nitpicking. This is the small 1%, 2% of stuff that, you know, I kind of get irritated or aggravated by. We talk about these cameras for their big tentpole features. I don't know anyone who's super excited about 4K 24 anymore. We've had that since the GH4. That's camera's ancient history by this point in time. 4K 60, we had that on the Lumix GH5. Now, granted, it wasn't a while till the full frame cameras kind of got that same technology, but 4K is kind of like done and dusted. Now we're talking about 6K and 7K and 8K and open gate and these higher resolutions and these faster frame rates in some cases. And that's the stuff that I want to test the thermal performance for, because that's usually the stuff that people are buying these cameras for. If you're buying a brand new camera just to shoot 4K 24 for 2.5 hours and it doesn't overheat, it's nice. But if you want the newest, latest, and greatest camera, you're probably buying it for the 7K. I want to test the overheating in that mode. And that's kind of where, again, it's 1%. Like, I take issue. It seems like sometimes we're picking the feature, like we're testing the scenario where overheating performs the best in a somewhat universal format, 4K 24, that's a lot of content, but we're not stress testing the actual biggest features of these newest cameras and seeing how that performs. Open gate, 60, 6K, that kind of stuff. That's really what I want to see, and that's what I want to know. Does it hold up? And I would hope that the engineers making these things are building the thermal management for those biggest and best features. Because if you want to shoot 4K 24 or even 4K 60, you can buy an ancient camera now that won't overheat on you because it doesn't have whatever these, fast processors are and the fastest memory cards imaginable that get hot. All the internal components are almost like catching on fire. They're melting down practically inside some of these cameras. Just to shoot 4K 24, like, that's not why you buy the new thing. You already have that. You probably can do that. You have been doing that. I'm sure if you're watching this video, you've probably been shooting 4K for years. So I do really want YouTubers, content creators, camera enthusiasts, if we see these hybrid cameras that have these incredible video or even cinema, as Jared calls it, these features, the camera needs to stand up to that challenge, not 4K 24. We've had that. So don't advertise the 6K, the 7K, the 8K, and then go, whoa, 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 whoa. But like, to actually use the thing, you've got to shoot 4K 24 because otherwise it's going to overheat. Otherwise there's a gotcha. Because you can say hypothetically, oh, it's not an issue. You can work around it, turn the camera off. Who needs to shoot longer than 30 minutes anyway? You can excuse it away, but I promise you, in real life, in practical terms, people on set, when you're actually making something and you're with a client or in the middle of a project or the sun's going down or whatever the case may be, you want that camera to work all the time. You don't want to have to swap camera bodies just because the one got too hot. People have done that. Like 5 years ago, it started kind of heading that way, where we started getting these newer full frame cameras that could do these really high end things like 8K or even 4K 60 or 4K 120. And yet, if they're like the cameras that have survived that stress test are the ones that don't overheat. I just look at any camera in the market that's fairly popular, like the A7S III, for example, or the FX3. Both cameras that have been around for quite a while and still stand up to the challenges are from Sony. And they're very popular because they're that reliable, they're that robust. Other cameras that people will say, they'll kind of hype up and say, oh, this is just like this, but cheaper. Or, oh, this is just as good, but a little bit more affordable. Stay away from that stuff. It's only going to bite you later. I promise you, you'll be doing a shoot and it's going to overheat right when you need it most. So any camera that's at risk of, I mean, aside from like the most crazy situation, if you're filming in Death Valley, okay, but I'm in Phoenix, Arizona. In the summer, it gets kind of hot here. I film stuff outside. It's a place we go to capture content outdoors. These cameras need to work, and they need to work reliably in those conditions at their best specs, not their mid-tier or low-tier 4K 24. Yes, that's fine. I want that feature. I even want these cameras to shoot 1080 because sometimes all you need is 1080. But across the entire spectrum, from 1080 to 6K to 8K, it all needs to work, and it all needs to work reliably outside of crazy circumstances where you drop the camera in a volcano or you lit it on fire, or you threw it in an oven or something crazy like that. Of course, it's going to melt in that scenario. But general purpose, outdoors, indoors, all the settings, they should all work reliably.
Complaints with the C50 was that it did not have IBIS at all. No image stabilization. Well, the R6 Mark III, you get 6.5 stops of image stabilization or up to 8.5 with certain IS lenses. This is a big deal for people who need that image stabilization and might be the thing that pushes them from the C50 to the R6 Mark III when they're making a decision on which camera is right for them, at least when it comes to shooting video.
Now, here's where things do get interesting, and things I appreciate that there are products out on the market that do cater to different types of consumers. There are some people, a small handful, I think, smaller relative to what most people would probably want. I think that smaller subset of people, they don't want IBIS for whatever reason. They want to fly it on a gimbal, or there's some particular reason they don't want the sensor having that, like, you know, looseness that you get with IBIS. For whatever reason. That's not me. I like IBIS. I love it. In fact, I think a lot of people do love IBIS and use it because it's so great. A camera of this size almost needs IBIS. Otherwise, to stabilize it, you have to build out a really big, heavy contraption. I made a video, gosh, a decade ago probably, talking about, before IBIS, how you make these cameras stable. Is you make them big, you give them some weight, some inertia. When they're so small, they're so tiny, they shake a lot. And so IBIS just takes all those jitters away and solves that problem. So IBIS, I think, for most people is what they would gravitate towards. They're going to aim and choose something like the R6 Mark III compared to the C50, maybe just on IBIS alone, as Jared mentions. But here's where it gets a little bit more interesting, because there's another huge thing that the C50 can't do that the R6 Mark III can do, and that's take a picture. It blows my mind that Canon makes these cinema cameras and they are truly like only video, only cinema. You can't take a picture with them. And yet their photo cameras get tons of the video features aside from things like the fan or, you know, maybe some codecs, you know, that are a little bit more robust or whatever. But they're essentially the same form factor or very similar minus the EVF. You end up paying more for the cinema camera that doesn't have the EVF, that doesn't have IBIS, that can't take a picture. There's so many things you're sacrificing by buying the cinema version, and yet it costs more. And yes, there may be a handful of things, little reasons in there why someone might opt for the cinema camera as opposed to the hybrid or the photography, the stills camera. But it's not the most of people. It's not the majority of people aren't going to gravitate towards the cinema one. So I do appreciate that they exist. I just wish there was a little bit more like parity between them. I like the idea of a C50 and would love to buy something like that, but I want it to take a picture. I want it to have IBIS, and, you know, the viewfinder, I could, you know, take it or leave it. To me, it seems like that should be cost savings. If there's no viewfinder, why is it costing more? That's usually my question. Oh, it's the fan. Yeah, because the fan is super expensive. Maybe, I don't know. I'm not a camera engineer, but it just seems like of all the things that would cost $1,000, I don't think it's the fan, but maybe. Who knows?
Things that took longer to do with the C50 than with the R6 Mark III was changing my video modes when I wanted to go from 24p to 60 or 120 because I had to dive into the menu. Well, with the R6 Mark III, you've got your custom 1, your custom 2, your custom 3, as well as the slow and fast on the dial. This really helped me when I was shooting soccer because I didn't have to dive into the menu anymore. I just needed to switch the top dial. But also,
So another benefit and why I think the hybrid cameras are the present, they certainly have been my past, but they are the present and they are the future, is those ergonomics, the usability. Again, when you're out there in the field doing your job, it doesn't really matter if you have the best dynamic range by like 0.5 of a stop, or hey, this can gives me a little bit more room in the raw file to pull the highlights back, or hey, but this is a pro cinema camera. No, at the end of the day, it's down to usability and just, is it practical? And there's so much benefit to these hybrid cameras from an ergonomic standpoint, how the buttons are laid out, how the dials are laid out. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of the Canon layout. It's fine. It's whatever. It's good. I prefer the Lumix body style and the way they have the buttons laid out on those, but Sony does, all right. Nikon, okay. You get used to it regardless of which one you personally prefer. But I can say for certain that almost any stills camera, any photography camera, any hybrid is way more fun to use, easier to use than any camera that's a cinema camera. And maybe you're the person out there going, yeah, but for a cinema camera, it's a whole crew and you have your operator and your assistant camera operator and all these people around and you need the buttons on the side. And yet those same people will find themselves on a job where they're the only operator of that device. And it can work, and you put it on sticks, you set up your tripod, and it kind of forces you to shoot that way. And that sometimes can be a benefit. Maybe it is your choice. But again, for most people, the majority of folks want the one device that can do pretty much all of it and do it all fairly well. Those cameras exist. They're out there right now. They have been out there. Plenty of cameras that'll give you everything you want and more in a usable package. It's not going to overheat. It's going to give you crazy resolution, open gate, etc. Those have existed for the longest time. So it's always weird when we're introducing new products, new advances. Oh, this is even the latest and greatest. And it still feels like we're like, what are we missing, folks? Like, why can't we complete this picture? Why is Canon over here making cinema cameras that can't take photos and then making photo cameras with all these crazy video features, but not doing simple things like making sure it doesn't overheat? And you can, attribute that to whatever you want. Maybe, oh, you don't want the fan. You just want a camera that takes pictures. And that's great. Those cameras exist. You don't even need to buy anything new because any camera from the last 10 years is going to take a great photo. Even any camera from the last 10 years is going to take great video. It's just those little things that kind of add up along the way. Does it do open gate? Does it do shutter angle? What are the frame rates? What are the codecs? How easy is it to hold and to use? Is it fast and responsive? Is it intuitive? Is the menu decently laid out? Are the buttons in the right places? What's the memory card folder structure look like? These little things matter so much more than they ever did before because 10 or 20 years ago, we were arguing about resolution, 720p and 1080p and 4K. And do you need 4K and can your eyes even see it? And now we're all the way up to 16K in some crazy situations. So the big stuff has been solved. It's the little stuff. It's the overheating. It's the interface. It's the user experience. All that stuff matters so much now. And it's frustrating that the new stuff still isn't getting that little stuff right. Like, make a good hybrid, Canon. Come on. You have the opportunity. You got this beautiful cinema lineup of all shapes and sizes, from the biggest to the smallest, now with the C50 and the C80 and the C70. Awesome, great, incredible cameras. But they can't take a picture. Like, why can't they take a, well, it's not for that. It's just, they're cinema cameras. They're not meant for taking a picture. I'm paying more for the cinema camera, getting less features, getting less hardware. And yet the R6 Mark III that Jared's talking about here can do a lot of those same video features, almost all of them. and it can take a picture, and it has IBIS, and it has the EVF, and it has the nice ergonomics. But you know that at the end of the day, when you need that camera to perform, it's probably going to overheat on you. So which one do you pick, right? As a hybrid shooter, as a content creator, which one do you pick? Do you pick the camera that doesn't let you take a photo, or do you pick the one that's probably going to overheat on you? How do you make that decision? Guess what? You don't. You end up buying a different brand. You buy a different camera. You buy a Sony or a Lumix or something else, because when we have these arbitrary, like they're almost perfect, but you know, these couple things here or there, like big, you know, deal breaker type stuff, you just throw your hands up and you walk away and you say, I don't want to play this game anymore. Canon. I just want the thing to work and everything you advertise to be what it is, rock solid, and I can shoot with it. I'm not asking for anything more than you've advertised, but I am asking for what you've advertised to work reliably. And that's my biggest consideration. My biggest worry about any of these new things is they always seem just like incomplete on purpose.
About people that are looking to decide between a C50, which is a full-on cinema camera, or the R6 Mark III, which Canon is saying is a stills camera first, but you can clearly see that it is a healthy cinema style camera, just doesn't have the fan, but adds the IBIS, which the C50 doesn't have. It is a solid camera. You have an EVF where you don't have an EVF on the other side. If you're a hybrid shooter, you want the best of both worlds, it's very hard to tell you to spend an extra $1,000 to go get that C50. But if you need the fan and you need to do all that continuous shooting and you're not really shooting stills pretty much at all, the C50 with the top handle that you get at $38.99 and those XLR inputs is going to be a great option.
Jared kind of summed it up nicely, I guess, and painted the exact same picture that I just painted, which is, I don't know, pick your poison. Which one do you want? Do you want the camera that doesn't have the fan that could overheat, or do you want the cinema camera that it won't overheat, but you can't take a picture with it? It would be nice to have a hybrid that does both reliably well, doesn't overheat, gives you all the great resolution, frame rate, color options, you know, and those are out there. They do exist. It just is unfortunate that maybe it's not the R6 Mark III. I'm glad that people who shoot Canon, maybe you're one of them, if you've got RF glass and you've invested in the Canon lineup and you've been shooting Canon, maybe the R6 Mark III gets you closer to that destination you're aiming for. You know, open gate, finally, right? Some of these other features, finally. Okay, great. Now we're chipping away at the problem. We're getting there. Maybe it's raw. I don't know, whatever you're into. But then still other things like the flippy screen not being as flippy as you might want it, or the overheating, no fan. Okay, we'll pay a little bit more for the other one. And what's funny is you try and play that game. And I've done this with the Canon lineup. Okay, well, this one doesn't do that, so I'll pay a little bit more. I'll upgrade, you know, to this other one. Oh, but this one doesn't do that, so I'll pay a little bit more and upgrade. And it's kind of funneling you upward the chain to spend a little bit more, to spend a little bit more, to spend a little bit more. And by the time you get to the place where you have those features that you want, all of a sudden you're certainly way above the price point of competitors, which is kind of the way they get you. You know, if you're trying to compare them apples to apples, like everything looks like it's more or less the same price these days. Okay, at $2,000, $3,000, and then you start actually comparing feature for feature and the Canon prices inflate, and it brings you to a price point that you weren't comfortable with, where it's not where you started comparing anyway. And it gives you probably a body style, a camera that's not even how you want to shoot. This is the funny dilemma on their cinema lineup. You know, looking at something like the C80 going, hey, that's kind of like this hybrid. That's cool, but I can't take a picture. And oh, the C50, that's even smaller, more compact, like an FX3, but can't take a picture. But the FX3 can take a picture, you know? And that's what makes hybrid cameras so valuable, is that they are a hybrid. They do both. And there's a lot of hybrids out there that do both remarkably well. So if you're going to have a hybrid that doesn't do photos, like the cinema line is just not hybrids at all. Those are just cinema cameras. But again, how many people are shooting cinema? No, they're probably using it for YouTube or TikTok or Instagram or something. So what do people get? They get the hybrids. They get the photo cameras. And they're going to get the ones that perform well, unless there's some other crazy I don't know, specific Canon feature that you need. But people wonder, they talk about it. Like, how did Sony beat Canon at their own game? How did Sony catch up? How did Sony, like, it's crazy. It's kind of not when you look at what they've done, the products they've rolled out, the features they've intentionally, you know, left out or stripped away or put over at this higher price point. It starts to add up and it makes sense why so many people went Sony, you know, and didn't go Lumix for the longest time, because it was Lumix isn't full frame and Lumix doesn't have good autofocus. So Lumix fixed that stuff. Lumix has full frame with great autofocus now. Everything else is like, all right, well, pick whichever one is going to work the best for you, based on the lenses you like, based on what the crews around you are shooting, because sometimes you have to plug in to someone else's system. So it totally makes sense if everyone around you is, hey, they're shooting Blackmagic. Well, yeah, shoot Blackmagic. That's fine. Everyone's shooting Sony? Yeah, get a Sony. Plugs right into most systems. But for me, I've just time and time again, I see these new cameras being announced. Hey, this is finally the one. It finally has OpenGate. Okay, yeah, I've been doing OpenGate for a long time. What else does it do? And it looks like, the else of what else it does is really nothing at all that you might want, unfortunately. So it is good if you have RF lenses or you like Canon. That I'm glad there's new options there. I just wish they were a little bit more compelling and a little bit more competitive in the landscape that push things forward, because I'm sick of companies getting away with the overheating. I'm sick of them getting away with like holding stuff back, like OpenGate or even shutter angle for that matter. That's like a dead point. I'll still keep beating the drum on shutter angle, but no one else seems to care, which fine. If that's how you like to shoot, always having to remember to change your shutter speed based on your frame rate, fine. You can shoot that way and constantly make mistakes. But for me, it's, yeah, no, why not? It's right there, shutter angle. It's been there for years. Always get a kick out of it.